Hi, I just wanted to make a little bit of a short video here, give some of my comments about some of these things that have been going on in the news lately about this charter of values that's going on here in Quebec that has a lot of people outside of Quebec kind of scratching their head and wondering, what's going on here. And so I wanted to give a little bit of commentary about this, although to be honest, a lot of us are kind of scratching our heads about this here in Quebec too. Um, anyway, for those who are, not too much on top of the details of this, it's a proposal by the minority separatist government here in Quebec to a proposal to. It's not a law that's passed. It's not something that's actually in the legislature that they're arguing about yet. It's a proposal that they announced, basically to talk about proposing banning for certain employees, basically employees working for the public, people like teachers, nurses, doctors, civil servants, and government offices, that they wouldn't be allowed to wear certain what they call ostentatious or conspicuous religious symbols. So things like a big cross or a kippah for a Jewish man, or hijab for a Muslim woman, or a turban for a Sikh man. So a suggestion was that in public offices, public employees, that they wouldn't be allowed to do this, under the argument that, and their argument is, it's kind of nonsense. It's basically nonsense, but their argument is from the standpoint of supporting secularism, separation of church and state. That somehow, if someone is wearing this religious symbol on them, that somehow it's the same as if they're proselytizing on the job. They're preaching on the job somehow. They're making some sort of religious statement, and they're not being neutral. Now, I mean, it's hard to know what to make of this. I mean, it's absurd on the face of it. It doesn't affect the ability to do the job. I mean, not pushing the religion. It's their own expression. I mean, most people in the rest of the country, in English Canada, they understand this. It's not an issue, and it's kind of a mystery how this can be, why this is coming up in Quebec. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's a decent idea in principle, the idea of separation of church and state. That if an employee is pushing religious pamphlets or something on, like, a teacher or a doctor or something, or a nurse, when they're supposed to be doing their job, fine, discipline them, do something about that. But the person is just there being themselves and dressing as they see fit because of their faith, but they're doing their job in a competent, professional way. That should be the only thing that's concerning. So the whole idea is kind of crazy. It's absurd. It doesn't make any sense. And fortunately, it looks like signs are good that this is not actually going to happen. A lot of good developments. Before last weekend, there was an announcement from the mayors and municipalities of the Montreal area, voicing their disagreement. All of the candidates for the Montreal mayoral election coming up sometime in the future have voiced their disagreement with it. And there's even some splits showing up amongst the separatist politicians. There was one of the big news story here in Quebec before the last weekend. One of the 5 remaining Bloc federal MPs from the slaughter of the Bloc Québécois from the Jack Layton's orange wave in the last election. One of the 5 remaining was a Lebanese Christian woman named Maria Marani, and she signed on to a declaration by a certain group of prominent figures in the separatist community and voiced their disgust with this idea, based on it being intolerance. And she was booted out of the federal Bloc Québécois caucus. And this past weekend, there was a big march here in Montreal. A lot of people showed up. I was there along with my family and many friends, and a lot of people. Very, very energetic march. I'm not sure about estimates, but there's some number of the thousands. I think easily it could have been 10,000, and this was even with unfortunate choice of date. It was Yom Kippur, so a lot of the Jewish community that is very vocally opposed to this and probably didn't show up in the numbers that they would have if it wasn't a religious holiday. So it was pretty impressive. But still, it's kind of confusing outside of Quebec and English Canada as to why there's support for this in the first place. There were polls coming out in previous weeks suggesting that 50s, 60% of Quebecers were in favor of this, which was just shocking to a lot of the English and immigrant populations in Quebec and the people outside of Quebec, how that could be possible. Again, fortunately, it looks like this is, as more details come out about this and as more polls come out in following up on more details coming out on this, it looks like saner heads are prevailing, and recent polls show that the support for this has dropped down significantly. Latest polls are showing well below 50%. So hopefully this is not going to be successful, and it looks quite possible that this will backfire. This cynical ploy by the Parti Québécois to try to make identity politics to try to stir up support. It looks like it might actually backfire and could destroy their minority government earlier than they would have thought, which is great. But basically, the reason making this video, I wanted to try to give a little bit of insight into where this is coming from, these sort of why there would be even any support of any sizable number in the year 2013 for something that's pretty bigoted, pretty xenophobic on the face of it. That this is evident to most of the population in the rest of Canada. So to give a little insight, this is not something that you see across Quebec. If you go in Montreal, you don't see support for this stuff. There's some probably amongst a certain population, but there's no support for this. Where you see support for this is in the rural areas outside of Montreal. And this is pretty funny because these are ironically the places where you have the least number of immigrants. If you go out into the country in Quebec, it's extremely homogeneous. It's very much almost 100% white French Canadians. So oddly enough, the likelihood that someone would support these kind of ideas of this charter of values, it goes up the less likely that person would be to actually meet an immigrant or a Sikh or a Muslim or a Jew in real life. The people where there are actually sizable populations of minorities and immigrants, where they meet minorities and immigrants on a daily basis, where they meet women with hijabs on a daily basis, where they meet men with turbans on a daily basis, they don't have the issues with it. It's the people that outside in the country that never meet anyone from a minority group, never meet an immigrant. So it's really it's doubly absurd. People are getting upset about situations that they never actually encounter, and people that actually encounter them, they don't have an issue with it. So largely, it's largely a matter of people being afraid of what they don't know. It's not a lot of people in the press and in the population, the rest of Canada. They kind of take us, oh yeah, the French, they're a bunch of bigots, they're a bunch of racists. This is the proof of it. I mean, this is just shows once again that they just hate everyone but themselves. And it's not really true. I mean, it's a matter of ignorance. It's literally a matter of ignorance. It's people being afraid of what they don't know. If you don't have any chance in your day-to-day activities to actually meet someone from a group, then it's just an abstraction on paper, and you don't have any real life, face-to-face humanizing kind of contact to take as kind of evidence to make your mental model of this group of people. So all you have to go on are, something that you read in a book, or in a hysterical magazine piece, or in some hysterical news piece. I mean, you see the same thing in rural groups in English Canada. You see the same thing in rural groups in the United States as well. It's just a matter of ignorance. The people are not necessarily bad people. I mean, I've traveled in the rural Quebec and met some of the people. They're very nice people. They're good people. They care about their family. They have a certain set of values, and they kind of have an irrational fear because they don't have any opportunities to meet human Muslims or Sikhs or Jews or Hindus or whatever. They don't get a chance to meet people, and so they just go by what they heard, and they feel somehow threatened, that their way of life is a threat. Now, like I said, you see this in English Canada, in some of the rural areas too. And I guess the question then would be, why is this so much more vocal, or why does this get so much more traction in Quebec than it does in the rest of Canada? You have rural yokels in Ontario as well. That when you take away the language thing, the way they talk about some of these things, certain people in rural Ontario, they sound a lot like some of the people in rural Quebec to a certain extent. So, I mean, why is it so much more traction in Quebec? I mean, it's complicated, but hard to get into all the details, I guess. But I mean, I guess it's kind of the double feeling of being besieged culturally. I mean, there's the feeling, paranoid and besieged about immigration, and then added on to a state of already being paranoid about your culture because you're a French minority within an English majority in the rest of North America. So it's kind of, there's that one thing that they're paranoid about, and then that other thing is added onto it, and it just becomes, kind of one straw too much. And it's not rational, but people are not always rational, unfortunately. Could talk more about that, but anyway, that's just to give a little bit of insight into what's going on with the situation in Quebec. That is ignorance of the unknown by certain groups. But again, thankfully, it looks like hopefully this is not going to come to pass. And that's all I have to say. Maybe I'll make another video about some of the finer points in more detail. But that's about all I have to say for today. Thanks. Bye.